was much more acute for me. This was the atmosphere in Leningrad as Kasparov was dominated by Karpov's new aggressive style. The audience was rooting for Karpov with cries of kill him, Karpov."
The game didn't go well for me in London, but in Leningrad I managed to win 3 times in a row, and Kasparov had never lost 3 times in a row against anyone. He was shocked.
His mother calls me. It's always like this. She starts talking a bit, and then she hands the phone over to Gary. I say, "Gary, what's going on?" "Tofik Gasanovic, we are off to a bad start," he says. "Karpov started to play very well. We don't have a new strategy to offer. This is a tough situation."
Dadashev felt many positive things, but it was not decisive enough. Obviously, people sometimes have extraordinary abilities, but they cannot create something that does not exist. If you believe in something, it can influence you, but if you don't believe, it will be useless. I had lost the 17th, so I used a new system for the 18th, and Karpov reacted in a weird way. But even so, I should have won. I could have ended the game, but instead I ruined everything after 3 moves. Right after that, I realized that I had to rethink the whole match. I tackled the problem and started to understand that Karpov had a sound source of information.
We reached a draw, and it is at that time that a spying campaign broke out. They said to themselves, "If there isn't any spy in our team, how come Gary could lose 3 games in a row? Is it not possible unless someone sells them information?" They snatched all the wires in the room. Supposedly, there were hidden microphones.
In the Kasparov camp, a spy hunt was launched. We decided to remove the telephones in all the hotel rooms. Cell phones didn't exist at that time. That's what we decided. And then one day, after an intense suspicion on Gary's part, Klara Kasparova decided to call Vladimirov in his room to verify. All the phones were supposed to be in manager Litvinov's office, but Vladimirov picked up to answer. That was it. He had kept a telephone. We fired him straight away after that incident. That's how it happened.
In fact, the biggest impact of an assistant's betrayal in chess playing is not really the contents, it's the psychological impact. I would say it's as if your own son betrayed you or denounced you for something that is not quite correct. You can expect anything, but not from someone in your own family.
The Vladimirov story is really rubbish, but the persecution mania was in full swing on the subject. It is true that Kasparov won the last game brilliantly. You have to admit this.
In the 22nd, I found the winning move. The game was in progress, and I had to analyze all possible combinations on the chessboard. And suddenly, I made a move that allowed a really nice combination, and that was it. It erased all my previous failures.
5 victories to 4. Kasparov was crowned world champion at last. His reign could finally begin. The next year, Garry Kasparov was in Seville, Spain, for the launch of the 1992 World Expo. He thought he was finally finished with his old adversary, but he was wrong. Tough as a boa, Karpov showed that he was still the only one able to compete with the new world champion.
My case is unique because after I lost the title, I stayed on top. It is something really rare that no world champion has achieved during the 20th century. That is, coming back and playing again in a game for the world championship after losing a title. And for a long period, it never happened again.
In Seville, it was extraordinary because for the first time, Soviet teams played the entire game outside of the USSR. It created a new situation. The media could talk directly to athletes. We would hold mini press conferences after every game. In order to realize the interest there was for this event, you could watch the games in Seville live on Spanish television. It was obvious that there was a deeply political dimension to these games. Everybody was fascinated by what was happening in the USSR, and the games were part of the perestroika process.
Kasparov launched the hostilities by publishing an autobiography just before the match. He portrayed Karpov as a man of the past and puppet of a corrupt system doomed to disappear.
This book was too provocative. I was 23 when I started writing it. I was world champion. I was on cloud 9. I had a lot of strength. It was the era of perestroika. We talked about reforms. One saw the new Grand Masters coming up and symbolizing change. And immediately, I wanted to talk about this. When one is in a hurry, nothing is done perfectly.
Encouraged by his mother, who managed the team with an iron hand, the young world champion had become arrogant, sure of himself.
You understand, as he was getting older, as his successes as a chess player became more and more remarkable, the Kasparov had a greater and greater opinion of themselves. They considered themselves as the most important people. They thought everything depended on them, that they could call the shots, and that coaches were not coaches anymore, but associates.
At age 36, Karpov was still highly motivated and far from finished. He took control and stayed ahead until the 24th and final round. He only needed a tie match to regain the World Championship title.
In the 24th and last game, objectively and statistically, the probability of Karpov being world champion again was very high. It certainly was around 70 to 80%. Because when Karpov wants to block the system to go to a tie, he is extremely good at this. So Kasparov will have to break through Karpov's impressive defense with few chances to succeed in reality.
Karpov sits in front of the chessboard, and at one point in the game, I can see in his eyes that a move has escaped him. He didn't quite realize which one, but he understood he had missed an opportunity. That specific moment, I read it in his eyes.
And he's going to play and play and play. He's going to increase his advantage and end up winning. He's going to save his skin. He's going to make it 12-12 and keep his title. So this last game is remarkable in the sense that Kasparov had this ability to win at crucial times.
Kasparov had been the king of chess for 3 years, a worldwide chess celebrity. He honed his public image with exhibitions, conferences, and publicity. He injected new life into chess, bringing it into the business of sports and developed computer programs. Meanwhile, his country, the USSR, was crumbling. Gorbachev had failed. Perestroika and glasnost only impoverished the country. Opening up the economy was a fiasco. Store shelves were empty. Kasparov distanced himself from the regime. He only believed in Reagan and Thatcher. During those years, the inflexible Karpov piled up his victories, so much so that in 1990 in New York and Lyon, he once again faced Kasparov for the 5th time. In New York, the setup matched Big Apple expectancies.
For the American audience, the press will forge a fairly black and white image. On one side we have Karpov, the communist, awarded the Order of Lenin by Brezhnev, a member of the Communist Party. On the other hand we have Kasparov, who symbolizes change, anti-communist, a nice guy, agreeable, and actually the American media will play a lot on this.
Karpov published an autobiography a few days before the match, repayment in kind for Kasparov's murderous book 3 years earlier. He settled the score between himself and his adversary.
During practice, Karpov wrote a book, pretentiously titled My Sister Kaisa. You can see his style, as if he belonged to a family of gods. When the book came out, I didn't read it in order to avoid any frustration, any psychological problem. It was easy for me. He wrote a book, so what? I stayed focused on the upcoming match.
Kasparov said very harsh things against Karpov. For example, he said that Karpov had a dark side, that he was evil, even diabolical. He said stuff like that. Karpov reacted by saying that he was lucky he wasn't an American citizen, otherwise he would have sued Kasparov.
During the competition in New York, Kasparov liberated himself politically. He created his own party and, to highlight it, refused to play under the same flag as his adversary.
To me, refusing to play with a Soviet flag completely matched my political position. I remember this story, as I can remember my mother making a Russian flag with I don't know what, because such a flag didn't exist. And when we arrived at the American TV studio with a handmade Russian flag, this caused a big scandal. Because the International Chess Federation didn't want that flag. The Soviet delegation protested, and we found a compromise. After discussions, we took away all the flags. And I liked the fact that there was no Soviet flag. I just had a name tag on my jacket with a Russian flag.
At that time, it wasn't the Russian flag. We didn't really know what it was. Historically, it was a military flag. In brief, this flag was never acknowledged, and it broke all rules. And because politicians don't always abide by the rules, I stood against that because it was no part of the rules.
In the end, the grand show fizzled out. When the exhausted duelists battled in Lyon, neither one could come out on top. They knew each other too well. There was a Frenchman among the Karpov coaches.
What is most impressive is Karpov's composure. Karpov is someone who is very, very calm, who never raised his voice after a defeat or because he was angry if a move had not been analyzed well. I never saw him reproaching something to anyone. I heard all the champions talk. Some of them get mad. It can cause explosive situations. There you go, very quiet. This is his great strength.
It's a super match. They are level. There'll be suspense till the end. In the last game, Kasparov has the whites. He will play very tough. Karpov will have a nervous breakdown. Kasparov will call a tie. Karpov will have no choice but to accept. In this case, no discussion about rumours, because this is normal. With a tie, he's world champion. He wins the title with 12.5 points against 11.5.
The fight was very tense. But to be objective, Kasparov was then better as a chess practitioner. Furthermore, we have to say that Karpov had very important other activities. He used to prepare for a match at the very last minute.
к матчу начинал
We arrived where the game was supposed to take place, and only at that time would he start working like a madman.
каташник вкалывать уже.
Lyon was the Special K's swan song. It was the last time the two Soviet champions met in a World Championship final. A year later, the Soviet Union collapsed.
Ну и понятно, что матч с Карповым на этот раз.
The game with Karpov was not a fight between the old and the new world.
Бой там старого и нового.
It was a fight between the Soviet Union and the new Russia.
Против уже нового российского.
I think my victory, by the end of 1991, became a very important symbol of change.
года это был очень важный факт.
It was as if Russia had won over the USSR,
Россия победила
and many people understood it that way.
это воспринимали.
It's been more than 2 decades since the red flag over the Kremlin has been lowered. Much time has elapsed. Today, Karpov is a Duma deputy, staunch supporter of Vladimir Putin's power. Kasparov has often been arrested in Moscow because he demonstrates against the regime, which he considers a dictatorship. He was even imprisoned for 5 days in 2007. That is when Anatoly Karpov wanted to visit him.
Пустили, так же, как моему.
He was not able to come to see me,
То, что он пришел, я
neither was my mother.
потому что они встретились.
But via his intermediary, he sent me a chess magazine.
Карпов передал мне там журнал 64. Я помню, что
When I was told it was Karpov,
принес.
I thought it was a bad
Сказал,
joke.
что это от Карпова.
However,
Думал,
it
что
was
это такая
true.
дурная шутка. Вот. Но потом оказалось действительно,
It was a magazine about chess,
Карпов мне принес шахматный журнал.
and it meant a lot to me.
Вот. Это для меня
It was a gesture of solidarity between world champions
солидарность
that put us
чемпионов
above our political
он поставил
differences
выше, чем политические.
and everything that had divided us during all those years.
Жизнь разделяла.
Почему я пошел?
Why did I go?
Ну, вы все знаете.
You know, it's a rather bitter episode for me, and not a very pleasant one for Russia.
Вот, я считал.
I thought we shouldn't act like we did.
Какое-то было и народ
Kasparov's offense wasn't serious enough to put a world champion in jail.
чемпиона мира.
Во многом как бы
Then I reviewed the way I felt about him.
пересмотреть свои отношения.
I had been very critical until then,
Оно просто
and I became much more moderate in my opinion of him.
более взвешенным. И
Anatoly Karpov's behavior wasn't insincere at all. It erased in my mind many negative feelings about our common past.
очень много того негативного, что было в прошлом.